A 17-year-old girl entered the most feared mountain man's cabin by mistake. But what happened next would haunt every soul in the valley. She thought she was running from danger. Instead, she ran straight into it. They said the man in that cabin killed anyone who came near. But when he found a half-frozen girl on his floor, something inside him changed. A fire was lit, and so were secrets buried deep beneath the snow. There was a burned cradle in the corner, a sheriff riding hard through the storm, and a truth that could ruin them both. In a land where law wears a crooked badge, mercy can be the deadliest weapon. When the storm breaks and the rifles rise, who will stand for justice, and who will fall to guilt? What really happened inside that cabin? When fear met forgiveness. Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind howled like a hungry wolf pack, driving needles of snow through Chloe's thin coat as she urged the borrowed mare higher into the Colorado highlands. Her fingers, stiff and blue inside threadbare gloves, could barely grip the reins. The horse's labored breathing formed clouds in the bitter air as they climbed the narrow trail. "Please, Lord," Chloe whispered through chattering teeth. "Just a little further." Her stepfather's angry shouts still echoed in her mind, along with the crash of breaking dishes and the sting of his backhand. She touched her swollen cheek, wincing. This time had been worse than usual. The gleam in his eyes had told her she had to run or die trying. The mare stumbled on loose shale, nearly sending Chloe tumbling down the steep mountainside. She steadied herself, heart pounding. The trail ahead disappeared into swirling white, but turning back wasn't an option. Twin Creek lay behind her, along with 5 years of terror under her stepfather's roof. Darkness crept across the mountains like spilled ink. The temperature plummeted as the sun vanished behind thick clouds. Chloe had heard tales of travelers frozen solid in these heights, found days later by trappers or hunting parties. She urged the exhausted horse onward, scanning desperately for shelter. That's when she saw it. A thin curl of wood smoke rising above the pines. Hope fluttered in her chest. Maybe a ranger's cabin, or a kindly settler who'd take pity on a girl caught in the storm. She guided the mare toward the smoke, branches whipping her face as they left the trail. The cabin materialized through the snow like a dream. Rough-hewn logs, a sturdy chimney, warm light leaking through crude window shutters. Chloe practically fell from the saddle, her legs numb and trembling. She stumbled to the door, raising a fist to knock. The wind caught the heavy door, throwing it wide. Chloe stumbled inside, desperate for warmth, and froze. There, silhouetted against the fireplace, stood a huge figure pointing a rifle straight at her chest. The firelight caught his face, revealing a mass of scars that twisted one side into a permanent snarl. Bear Jacobs, the beast of the ridge. Terror seized her throat. Everyone in Twin Creek knew about Bear Jacobs, the mad trapper who lived alone in the high country, who'd murdered his own family and burned his house down around them. Children whispered that he ate trespassers who strayed onto his mountain. Adults crossed themselves at the mention of his name. I'm so sorry, Chloe stammered, backing towards the door. "I didn't know. I'll go." The rifle barrel didn't waver. "Get out." His voice was like gravel grinding under wagon wheels. The scars pulled his mouth into a grotesque grimace. "Now." "Please," she whispered. Just until the storm passes. I'll die out there." She could barely feel her feet, her hands. "Not my concern." He took a step forward, firelight dancing across the twisted landscape of his face. "Out!" Chloe tried to step back, but her frozen legs betrayed her. The room tilted sideways as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. She felt herself falling, heard a muttered curse, then nothing. Warmth slowly seeped back into her awareness. She lay on something soft, wrapped in rough wool blankets. The crack and pop of a fire filled her ears. Chloe opened her eyes carefully. She was on a narrow cot pushed against one wall of the cabin. Bear Jacobs sat in a crude chair by the fire, rifle across his knees, watching her with his good eye. The scarred side of his face was in shadow. "Fool girl," he growled, "riding these heights in a storm." He gestured at a steaming cup on a small table near the cot. "Drink that. Then you leave." Chloe struggled to sit up, her body aching. The cup held some kind of bitter tea that burned going down but spread welcome warmth through her chest. She studied her unlikely savior from beneath lowered lashes. Up close, Bear Jacobs was even more fearsome than the stories painted him. He was massive, with shoulders like a grizzly's and hands that could probably snap her neck without effort. His dark hair and beard were shot through with gray, and that terrible mass of scarring covered nearly half his face. But his good eye wasn't mad or murderous, just wary, like a wild thing watching for danger. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not letting me freeze." He grunted, not looking at her. "Storm's still building. You'll stay till morning, then you go back where you came from." Chloe's hands tightened around the cup. "I can't go back. He'll kill me this time." That got his attention. His good eye fixed on her face, noting the bruise darkening her cheek. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. "Your father?" he asked gruffly. "Stepfather." The word tasted bitter on her tongue. 5 years he's had me under his thumb. Breaking things, breaking me. Tonight was different, though. I saw it in his eyes. He meant to do worse than usual. Bear shifted in his chair, the hot wood creaking under his weight. "Law in Twin Creek's supposed to handle such things." Chloe laughed, a sharp, hurt sound. "Sheriff Dane? He and my stepfather drink together at the saloon. He sees the bruises, same as everyone else. Turns his head the other way." At the mention of Sheriff Dane's name, Bear's scarred face twisted. His massive hands clenched on the rifle stock. "Dane." He spat the name like poison. "Still wearing that tin star, is he?" "You know him." "Knew him. Once." Bear stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire. The flames leaped higher, throwing his shadow huge against the cabin wall. "Get some rest. You'll need strength for tomorrow's ride." "Please," Chloe said. "I can work. Cook, clean, mend clothes. Just let me stay a few days, until I can figure out somewhere else to go." He turned back to her, firelight catching the ruin of his face. "This ain't no place for a girl. I live alone for reason." "Because of what happened to your family?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Bear went very still. "What do you know about my family?" His voice was dangerous, quiet. Chloe swallowed hard. Just what people say in town, about the fire, about your wife and baby." She trailed off as he stalked toward her, looming over the cot. "People say," he snarled. "People don't know nothing. Wasn't me killed them. Wasn't me set that fire. But people believe what they want, don't they? Easier to blame the ugly beast than look deeper." Tears pricked Chloe's eyes at the raw pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He turned away, shoulders rigid. "Sleep. Tomorrow you go." "Where?" she asked softly. "Where can I go that's safe?" Bear was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he spoke without turning. "There's a mission station, 2 days' ride north. Good people there. They'll help. 2 days through this storm, I'll never make it alone." "You won't be alone." He sighed heavily. I'll take you. Get you there safe. Then we're done. Relief flooded through Chloe, making her dizzy. Thank you. I know I'm nothing but trouble, but thank you. Bear moved back to his chair, settling his bulk carefully. Sleep now. Long ride tomorrow. Chloe lay back on the cot, pulling the blankets close. Despite her fear and exhaustion, questions tumbled through her mind. What really happened to Bear's family? Why did the mention of Sheriff Dane affect him so strongly? But her eyes grew heavy as the fire's warmth wrapped around her. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Bear Jacobs sitting sentinel by the fire, his scarred face softened by shadows, looking less like a beast and more like a man carrying deep wounds of his own. Morning crept into the cabin like a cautious cat, pale light seeping through frost-rimed windows. Chloe stirred beneath the thick wool blankets, her body stiff from sleeping on the narrow cot. The fire had burned low during the night, but someone had kept it fed. Bear must have stayed awake, watching. She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing at her aching muscles. The cabin looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, but no less imposing. Rough-hewn logs made up the walls, chinked tight against the mountain winds. 2 rifles hung on pegs above the fireplace, their barrels gleaming with careful maintenance. A single bunk was built into the far wall, its blankets military neat. But it was what sat in the corner that caught her eye and held it. A wooden cradle, lovingly carved with leaves and vines. A thick layer of dust covered it like gray snow, undisturbed for years. Chloe's heart squeezed at the sight. Someone had spent hours creating that cradle, working life into dead wood, hoping to fill it with new life. The door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air. Bear ducked through, arms full of split wood. He stacked it by the hearth without looking at her, his movements precise and economical. The scars on his face looked harsher in daylight, pulling his features into a permanent grimace. "Storm's still holding," he said gruffly, straightening. "Tracks are covered. No traveling today." He moved to the small iron stove, where a pot simmered. The smell of broth filled the cabin, rich and savory. Using a cloth to protect his hands, Bear ladled some into a tin cup and brought it to her, keeping his distance as he held it out. "Thank you," Chloe said softly, taking the cup. The broth was hot and hearty, tasting of rabbit and wild onions. She sipped carefully, watching as Bear retreated to his chair by the fire. He sat with the deliberate care of a large man used to moving in small spaces. "I could help," she offered after a while. "With chores, I mean. I'm good at cooking, and I can mend clothes." "No." He didn't look at her. "You'll leave when the storm breaks. No sense getting settled." Chloe's fingers tightened on the cup. Outside, the wind moaned around the cabin's corners like a living thing. In the distance, a wolf howled, a long, lonely sound that made her shiver despite the fire's warmth. Another wolf answered, closer. "Pack's moving down," Bear said, more to himself than to her. "Storm's driving them to lower ground. They'll be hunting." The wolves called again, their voices twining together in ancient hunger. Chloe set her empty cup aside and clasped her hands in her lap, closing her eyes. The prayer came naturally, as it always had. "Lord, keep watch over us in this wilderness, guard us from harm, and guide our steps towards safety." She continued quietly, her whispered words mixing with wood smoke in the cabin's still air. When she opened her eyes, she found Bear watching her with an unreadable expression. "Been a long time since anyone prayed in this cabin," he said finally, turning back to the fire. The day crept past with aching slowness. The storm showed no sign of weakening. If anything, the snow fell thicker, piling against the windows until only a gray light filtered through. Bear moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, checking his stores, maintaining his tools, all while keeping a careful distance from Chloe. She stayed on the cot, trying to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. Her eyes kept straying to that dust-covered cradle. What had happened here? The stories in Twin Creek painted Bear Jacobs as a monster who had murdered his family. But watching him move about his domestic tasks with such contained grace, she found that hard to believe. As evening drew in and Bear lit the lamp, something in the cabin's atmosphere shifted. Maybe it was the wolves' voices, growing bolder in the gathering dark. Maybe it was the weight of too much silence. Whatever the cause, Bear spoke suddenly, his voice rough with disuse. "Where did you come from? Before?" He didn't look at her, focused on feeding wood to the fire. "Twin Creek," Chloe answered. "Born there. My mama died when I was 12. And my stepfather—" She trailed off as Bear's shoulders stiffened. "Twin Creek," he spat the words like they tasted bitter. "Ain't no good comes from that town. Nothing but lies and betrayal." His scarred face twisted as he stood abruptly, pacing the cabin's length with caged energy. Chloe drew her knees up to her chest, watching him. There was history there, raw and bleeding despite the years. She thought of the cradle in the corner, of the stories whispered in town. How much was truth? How much was lies? The snow continued to fall outside, thick and silent. The wolves called to each other in the gathering dark. And in the cabin, 2 wounded souls waited out the storm, each carrying their own burden of grief and fear, while an empty cradle gathered dust in the corner, a silent witness to love lost and pain endured. Bear stoked the fire one final time for the night, his movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "Get some sleep," he said, not looking at her. "Storm might break tomorrow." But they both knew it wouldn't. The snow fell harder, and the wind sang its lonely song around the cabin's walls, while wolves prowled in the darkness beyond. 3 days passed like molasses in winter, each hour marked by the steady fall of snow outside the cabin windows. The storm showed no sign of breaking, wrapping the mountain in a thick white blanket that muffled all sound except the occasional howl of distant wolves. Inside the cabin, life fell into an unexpected rhythm. Chloe discovered a basket of mending beneath Bear's bunk. Shirts with torn sleeves, socks worn through at heel and toe, a jacket with missing buttons. Without asking permission, she set to work, her nimble fingers keeping time with the hymns she hummed under her breath. Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. The familiar melody filled the cabin's corners while she worked. Bear sat at his wooden table, running a whetstone along his hunting knives with slow, practiced strokes. He never looked up, never acknowledged her singing, but his movements seemed to fall into time with the gentle music. The morning of the 3rd day, Chloe found flour and lard in Bear's stores. "May I?" she asked, holding up the ingredients. He grunted what she took for assent, so she set about making biscuits. Soon, the cabin filled with the warm smell of baking bread. When she placed a plate of golden brown biscuits on the table, Bear stared at them as if they were foreign objects. "Been a while," he muttered, breaking one open. Steam rose from the fluffy interior, and something in his face softened for just a moment. Chloe returned to her mending, another hymn rising naturally to her lips. "Rock of Ages, cleft for me." The familiar words brought comfort, helping her forget the fear that had driven her to this place. As she worked, she caught Bear's hand slowing on the whetstone, his head tilting slightly toward the music. The short winter day faded quickly into evening. Bear lit the lamp, its warm glow casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Chloe's eyes strayed, as they often did, to the dust-covered cradle in the corner. Tonight, something made her brave enough to ask. "The cradle," she said softly, setting aside her mending. "Did you make it?" Bear's hands stilled on his knife. The lamplight caught the deep furrows of his scars, turning them to valleys of shadow across his face. For long moments, only the pop and crackle of the fire broke the silence. "Carved it myself," he finally said, his voice rough as bark. "During the waiting time. Sarah, my wife, she was carrying our first. Spent every evening working the wood, wanting it perfect for the baby." Chloe held her breath, afraid any movement might break this moment of openness. Bear set down his knife, running one calloused finger along the whetstone's edge. "Sarah used to say I fussed more over that cradle than she did over the baby clothes she was sewing." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. "Named him Asher when he came. Good strong name, biblical, means blessed, happy one. He was too, always laughing, reaching for anything that moved. Sarah said he had my eyes." The fire popped loudly, making Chloe jump. Bear's face had gone distant, lost in memory. "What happened?" she whispered, though part of her already knew. Bear's hand drifted to the scarred side of his face, fingers tracing the familiar ridges. "Fire," he said, the word falling like a stone. "I was out checking trap lines, came back to find the cabin in flames, tried to get to them." His voice caught. "Couldn't. The heat. Ceiling came down." He turned his face toward the fire, but not before Chloe saw the shimmer of moisture in his good eye. "Lost the sight in this eye," he continued roughly, gesturing to the milky orb. "Lost everything that mattered. Town said I set the fire myself, though I never knew why they'd think that. Sheriff Dane had it in for me, always did. Didn't matter. Nothing mattered after that. Couldn't stay there, watching people cross the street when they saw me coming, whispering about the monster who killed his own family." Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the fire's quiet crackle and the endless wind outside. Chloe's heart ached for the man before her, seeing not the feared beast of the ridge, but a father and husband broken by loss. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate, but needing to say them anyway. Bear stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire. His big hands were gentle with the logs, arranging them carefully. "Been a long time," he said, not looking at her. "Best get some sleep." Chloe lay down on her cot, pulling the blankets up to her chin, but sleep was long in coming. The cabin creaked and settled around her, and sometime in the deep of night, she heard something that made her hold her breath. Bear's voice, rough and unpracticed, barely louder than a whisper. "Lord, been a while since we talked. Don't know if you're listening anymore, but thank you for sending someone to fill this place with hymns again. Didn't know how much I missed the sound." Tears slipped silently down Chloe's cheeks. She eased from her cot, careful not to make a sound, and knelt beside the dusty cradle. Her fingers traced the lovingly carved vines and leaves as she whispered her own prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing me to this safe harbor. Thank you for showing me that the stories were wrong, that there's still goodness here. Please help heal his heart. Help him find peace again." The fire burned low, casting soft light on the cradle's smooth wood. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin something had shifted. A hymn's gentle echo, a rough prayer in the dark, a young girl's whispered thanks, small things, perhaps, but like seeds planted in soil, long fallow, waiting for spring's warmth to grow. The storm's fury finally broke after 5 long days. Morning sunlight sparkled off fresh snow, turning the mountain world into a glittering blanket of white. Inside the cabin, Chloe folded the borrowed blankets with careful hands, smoothing each crease as if trying to press the memories of warmth and safety into the fabric. Bear watched from his workbench, his scarred face unreadable. "Storm's passed," he said gruffly, stating what they both knew but neither wanted to acknowledge. "Yes," Chloe replied softly, setting the folded blankets on the end of his bunk. "I can't thank you enough for—" She gestured around the cabin, words failing to express the depth of her gratitude. Bear stood, his joints creaking like old timber. "Can't let you walk down alone. Trail's treacherous after snow." He reached for his heavy coat. "Got a mule can carry you part way, at least." Chloe nodded, swallowing past the lump in her throat. These past days had shown her a different man than the monster of local legend. She'd seen his gentle handling of injured animals, heard his quiet prayers in the night, watched his calloused hands carve delicate patterns into wood, scraps by firelight. Outside, the morning air bit sharp and clean. Bear led his mule from the lean-to shelter, checking the animal's hooves for packed snow. Chloe gathered her few belongings, wrapped once more in her borrowed shawl. The thought of returning to Twin Creek made her stomach clench, but she couldn't impose on Bear's hospitality forever. Just as Bear began securing her bundle to the mule's back, a sound carried up the ridge, the distant thunder of hoofbeats climbing the snow-packed trail. Bear's head snapped up, his good eye narrowing as he listened. "Inside," he commanded, voice hard with urgency. "Now." Chloe didn't hesitate. She ducked through the cabin door, pressing herself against the rough-hewn wall beside the window. Through the glass, clouded with age and frost, she watched Bear stand his ground as 6 riders emerged from the trees. The man in the lead sat tall in his saddle, authority worn like his well-oiled gun belt. Silver threads in his dark hair caught the morning light, and his badge glinted on his chest. Sheriff Dane. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. "Well, well," the sheriff drawled, reining his horse to a stop. "If it ain't the killer preacher himself, still hiding up here with your guilt, Jacobs?" Bear's hand tightened on his rifle, but his voice came level and controlled. "What brings you to my property, Sheriff?" Dane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Official business, hunting a thief. Young girl, run off with valuables from her stepfather's house. Trail leads this direction." He swept his gaze over the cabin. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Do mind, actually." Bear shifted, blocking the cabin door. "Got no thief here, just me and my solitude like always." One of the deputies spat into the snow. "Mighty suspicious, refusing a lawful search." "Ain't refusing," Bear replied. "Just stating facts. Nobody here but me." Sheriff Dane dismounted, his spurs ringing in the crisp air. He walked toward Bear with the easy confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "You forget, Jacobs. I knew you before, back when you still thought you could serve both God and country." He stopped just out of arm's reach. "Before you showed your true colors, before the fire." Inside the cabin, Chloe pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling her breathing. Bear's face had gone still as stone, but she could see the tremor in his trigger hand. "That fire took my wife and son," Bear said, each word measured and heavy. "You know that better than most, seeing as you were first on the scene." "Convenient, that." The sheriff's laugh was cold as the mountain wind. "Still spinning tales of conspiracy, are we? Face facts, Jacobs. You couldn't handle the pressure. Snapped like a dry twig. Set that fire yourself, probably didn't even remember doing it." He took another step closer. "Just like you probably don't remember taking in any fugitive girls recently." "Nothing to remember," Bear answered. "Nothing to find." Dane studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Have it your way. Boys, search the outbuildings. Thoroughly." The deputies dismounted, spreading out across Bear's small homestead. They upended feed bins, scattered hay, and trampled through the fresh snow. Chloe held her breath as footsteps crunched past her hiding place, but none tried the cabin door with Bear standing guard. "Must get lonely up here," Dane mused, watching his men search. "All alone with your guilt. Tell me, do you still try to pray? Still think the Lord's listening to a man who burned his own family alive?" Bear's rifle barrel dipped slightly, his knuckles white on the stock. For a heartbeat, Chloe feared he might raise the weapon, but he only stood straighter, meeting Dane's mocking gaze. "The Lord sees truth, Sheriff, even when men try to bury it." "Nothing here, Sheriff," called one of the deputies. "No tracks except his own, neither." Dane mounted up, gathering his reins. "Well, Jacobs, seems you're in the clear, this time." His cold smile returned. "But I'll be watching. One day you'll slip up, show what you really are, and I'll be there to see justice done. Again." The posse wheeled their horses around, hooves churning the pristine snow. As they started down the trail, Dane called back over his shoulder. "Better pray that girl doesn't freeze to death in these mountains. Would be another death on your conscience, wouldn't it?" Bear stood like a statue until the last echo of hoofbeats faded. Only then did his shoulders sag, as if a great weight pressed down on him. He entered the cabin slowly, setting his rifle in its rack with careful precision. Chloe stepped out from behind the wall, her legs shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door." Bear sank onto his bench, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Ain't your doing. Dane's had it in for me since our army days. Him being my commanding officer didn't stop him from watching me fail, waiting for his chance." "The fire," Chloe said softly. "He framed you?" Bear nodded, his gaze distant. "Sarah, my wife, she'd inherited good land from her father, land Dane had been trying to buy for years. After the fire, he swooped in like a vulture, took it all, used his badge to make sure no one looked too close at the truth." "But surely someone must have questioned." "Town wanted someone to blame," Bear cut in. "Easier to believe the grieving husband went mad than think their respected sheriff could be corrupt." His hand drifted to his scarred face. "These marks made it simple. People see what they expect to see." Chloe sank onto her cot, mind whirling. The sheriff's cruelty, his obvious pleasure in tormenting Bear, it matched everything she knew of the man who'd made Twin Creek bow to his will. Bear stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Can't let you go back," he said. "Not now. Dane's got his teeth in this hunt. He won't stop until he finds you or—" He left the rest unsaid. "But where can I go?" Chloe asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Bear was quiet for a long moment, watching snow fall from the pine boughs outside. "Got a friend runs a trading post 2 days' ride north," he finally said. "Good man, honest. Might have work for someone who can cook and sew." He turned to face her. "If you're willing to trust me that far." Chloe looked around the cabin, at the dusty cradle that spoke of love and loss, at the rifle rack that had defended her, at the hearth where she'd found unexpected sanctuary. She met Bear's gaze and saw not the beast of the ridge, but a protector offering safe passage. "I trust you," she said simply. Bear nodded once, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Rest today. We'll leave before first light tomorrow. Less chance of being seen that way." He moved to the door, then paused. "Chloe," he said, her name sounding strange in his rough voice. "What Dane said, about praying. Truth is, I stopped for a long time after Sarah and Asher. Felt like God had turned his back." He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his good eye. "But hearing you sing those hymns these past days, maybe he ain't as far away as I thought." Chloe blinked back tears, as Bear stepped outside to tend his animals. She knelt beside the cradle, running her fingers over its smooth wood, and whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for safety, but for the way God could take broken pieces and begin to make something whole again. The first pale light of dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-laden branches in shades of pearl and gold. Bear Jacobs moved through his morning tasks with practiced efficiency, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He secured leather straps across his mule's broad back, methodically checking each buckle twice. Years of mountain living had taught him the cost of careless preparation. Inside the cabin, Chloe Vance folded her few belongings into a borrowed saddlebag. Her fingers trembled, but not from the cold. The events of yesterday still haunted her. Sheriff Dane's mocking voice, the deputies searching the grounds, and Bear standing like a sentinel between her and harm. She touched the rough-hewn wall of the cabin that had sheltered her, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude. Bear appeared in the doorway, his scarred face grave. "Time to move," he said softly. "Dawn's the safest hour. Most men are still sleeping off their night watch." Chloe nodded, shouldering the saddlebag. Outside, her borrowed mare stood beside Bear's mule, steam rising from her nostrils. The horse's right front leg showed signs of strain from her desperate flight to the cabin days ago. "She ain't looking good," Bear observed, running weathered hands down the mare's leg. "But she'll follow if we take it slow." He glanced at Chloe. "Could leave her." "No," Chloe interrupted, her voice firm despite her fear. "I won't abandon her. She saved my life getting me here." She stroked the mare's velvety nose. "We'll manage together." Something flickered in Bear's good eye. Respect, perhaps, or memory. He nodded once and turned to secure the last of their provisions: dried meat, cornmeal, coffee, and his old army rifle wrapped in oiled cloth. "I can ride beside you," Chloe said, checking the mare's girth strap. "I won't slow us down." Bear studied her for a moment, noting her straight spine and determined expression. "Reckon you won't," he agreed quietly. Without another word, he swung onto his mule and adjusted his hat against the growing light. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. Bear led them away from the main trail, following game paths that wound through stands of towering pines. The snow lay deep here, unbroken except for deer tracks and the occasional rabbit print. Their mounts moved carefully, hooves breaking through the crusty surface with each step. The forest felt different today, eerily still, as if holding its breath. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the soft breathing of their mounts, and somewhere far below, the faint baying of dogs. Bear's shoulders tensed at that distant sound, but he kept their pace steady. By midday, they'd descended through 3 valleys, each more remote than the last. Bear chose their route with careful precision, sometimes doubling back or crossing streams to break their trail. He spoke little, but his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit. When the sun hung directly overhead, they entered a sheltered glade. A small stream ran through it, its surface frozen into fantastic patterns. Bear raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Need to rest the animals?" he said, dismounting, "and teach you a few things about surviving up here?" Chloe slid from her mare's back, her legs stiff from the cold ride. She watched as Bear quickly established a camp, noting how he positioned them with clear sight lines in all directions. "First lesson," he said, gathering twigs and bark. "Fire's your friend, but smoke's your enemy. Got to know how to make one without advertising your location." He pulled a piece of flint from his coat pocket. "Watch close now." Chloe knelt beside him as he demonstrated the proper technique: how to arrange the tinder, strike the flint at the correct angle, and nurse the tiny spark into flame. His huge hands moved with surprising delicacy, shielding the growing fire from the wind. "Your turn," he said, offering her the flint. It took 4 attempts before Chloe produced a spark that caught. Her fingers were numb, but satisfaction warmed her as the small flame took hold. Bear nodded approvingly. "Good. Next is keeping watch." He pointed to various positions around their camp. "Always have 3 escape routes planned. Watch the birds. They'll tell you if someone's coming before you see them. And remember," he tapped his ear, "listen more than you look." As their small fire heated snow for coffee, Chloe gathered her courage. "Mr. Jacobs," she began, then corrected herself. "Bear, I need to tell you something." He looked up from feeding small sticks into the flame, waiting. "That mare, I didn't steal her." The words tumbled out in a rush. "She belongs to my friend Mary. She let me take her when my stepfather—" Chloe's voice caught. "When he threatened to sell me to the mine owner's son, said it would teach me proper respect." Bear's face darkened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "Not after what happened to Jenny Miller last month. The mine owner's son, he—" She shook her head, unable to finish. "Ain't no theft to run from evil," Bear said finally, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "You did right, girl, both by running and by telling me truth." Relief washed over Chloe. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she'd needed his understanding, his confirmation that her choices had been right. They shared a simple meal of corn cakes and dried venison. Bear taught her how to wrap hot stones in leather to keep warm through the night, and how to read the weather from the way smoke moved in the air. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Chloe found herself studying his scarred face, seeing past the surface to the good man beneath. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They were breaking camp when Bear suddenly stiffened, his head cocked to one side. Following his gaze, Chloe saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from the valley they'd passed through yesterday. "Pursuit?" she asked, her heart hammering. Bear nodded grimly. "They're following our track, right enough, but they don't know these mountains like I do." He quickly scattered their fire's ashes and erased signs of their camp. "We'll move quiet now. No talking unless necessary." They mounted up and continued their journey north, each lost in their own thoughts. The mare's limp was worse today, but she gamely followed Bear's mule through deep drifts and across icy streams. Chloe found herself praying silently for their safety, for the mare's strength, and for the quiet man who'd risked everything to help her. Bear led them through paths so narrow they had to proceed single file, beneath low-hanging branches heavy with snow, and across rock falls that would leave no trace of their passing. His woodcraft was remarkable, reading signs invisible to Chloe's eyes, choosing routes that kept them hidden while still making progress toward their destination. The sun climbed higher, but the day remained silent except for the soft sounds of their mounts breathing and the occasional crack of a snow-laden branch. Bear maintained their careful pace, though Chloe could sense his growing tension. Every so often, he would stop and listen intently, his face turned toward the wind, like a wolf scenting danger. By midday, they'd covered significant ground, but the distance felt somehow inadequate against the threat behind them. Chloe knew Bear was taking the safest route, rather than the fastest, yet each time they paused to rest the animals. She imagined she could hear dogs baying in the distance. What struck her most was how naturally they moved together now. No words needed, just small gestures and shared understanding. When Bear raised his hand, she knew to stop. When he pointed to his ear, she knew to listen. They had become a team of sorts, bound together by necessity and growing trust. The borrowed mare stumbled, and Chloe quickly dismounted to check her leg. The horse's eyes showed white around the edges. She was reaching her limit. Bear watched this exchange without comment, but his expression softened when Chloe pressed her forehead against the mare's neck, whispering encouragement. They continued on, leading their mounts through the deepest snow to spare them extra strain. The afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows through the trees. Bear's shoulders remained tense, his good eye constantly scanning their surroundings. Though he hadn't spoken for hours, his protective presence spoke volumes. Chloe realized that this silent journey marked a profound change in their relationship. Bear wasn't just sheltering her anymore. He had fully committed to her safety, choosing to become a fugitive himself rather than abandon her to Dane's corrupt justice. The thought humbled her, even as it strengthened her resolve to prove worthy of his trust. The wall of mountains loomed ahead, their peaks lost in gathering clouds. Somewhere beyond them lay the trading post Bear had mentioned, and perhaps a chance at a new life. But for now, there was only the next step, the next moment, and the wordless bond forming between an unlikely pair of fugitives in the vast wilderness. The mountain air bit sharp and clean as Bear and Chloe pushed higher into the frozen peaks. 2 days of hard riding had left them both exhausted, their mounts struggling through snow that reached past their knees. The borrowed mare's limp had worsened, forcing them to stop more frequently. Each rest brought the risk of pursuit closing in, but Bear wouldn't sacrifice the animals to haste. Near midday, they reached a narrow pass between towering walls of granite. Wind-carved ice hung from the cliffs like frozen tears. Bear suddenly reined his mule to a halt, his good eye fixed on the snow ahead. "What is it?" Chloe whispered, drawing her mare alongside. Bear dismounted silently, kneeling to study marks in the snow that Chloe could barely see. His weathered fingers traced the impressions with careful precision. "Moccasin tracks," he said finally, rising. "Ute hunting party, maybe 4 hours ahead." His voice held no fear, but Chloe tensed at the news. "Are we in danger?" she asked, remembering stories from Twin Creek about tribal raids. Bear shook his head. "Not all stories told in town speak truth about the people." He remounted, adjusting his rifle across his lap. "Still, best we move careful. This is their land we're crossing." They hadn't gone 50 yards when a tall figure stepped out, from behind a snow-covered pine. Chloe's heart jumped, but Bear's posture actually relaxed. The stranger wore buckskins and a wool blanket wrapped as a serape, his long black hair tied back with a leather cord. A Winchester rifle hung easily in his hands, not threatening, but ready. "Brother Bear," the man said in clear English, a smile warming his dignified features. "The mountains whispered you might pass this way." "Henry," Bear replied, dismounting again. The two men clasped forearms in greeting, the gesture speaking of old trust and shared battles. "Been a long time since Rabbit Creek?" "5 winters," Henry nodded, "when we drove the raiders north." His dark eyes took in Chloe and the limping mare. "But you travel heavy for a hunting trip, my friend, and with interesting company." Bear's expression grew serious. "Need to make camp, Henry. Got a story you should hear." Henry gestured to a sheltered hollow just off the pass. "I have a fire already burning. The wind speaks of storm coming. Better to share words where it's warm." They led their mounts down a game trail to find a well-chosen campsite. A small fire burned in a rock-ringed pit, the smoke dispersing through pine boughs overhead. Henry helped Chloe dismount, his movements graceful and unhurried. "I am Henry," he said formally, "once scout for the army, Now eyes and ears for my people on these ridges." "Chloe Vance," she replied, surprised by his gentle manner. "Thank you for sharing your fire." While Henry tended the horses, Bear quickly outlined their situation: Chloe's flight from Twin Creek, Dane's pursuit, and the corrupt sheriff's history of violence. Henry listened without interruption, occasionally adding wood to the fire as snow began falling more heavily. "Dane," Henry said when Bear finished. "Yes, I remember him. A man who speaks with two tongues, making promises his heart never means to keep." He studied the fire thoughtfully. "The people know such men well." "Can you help us?" Bear asked directly. "Need safe passage through tribal lands. Maybe guide us to Thompson's trading post up north." Henry smiled slightly. "The old trapper who trades fair and speaks truth?" "Yes, I know the way." He gestured at the thickening snow. "But first we wait out this storm. 2, maybe 3 days before it's safe to travel." Chloe helped prepare a meal of dried meat and corn cakes, watching as the two men settled into what was clearly an old pattern of friendship. Their conversation moved easily between English and Ute, punctuated by comfortable silences. As darkness gathered, Henry began speaking of the years since they'd last met. "Many changes," he said, his voice carrying sadness. "More settlers coming, pushing the people from traditional hunting grounds. Treaties made, treaties broken. Some young men talk of war, but the elders counsel patience." "Your father still chief?" Bear asked. Henry nodded. "Though he grows tired. Says his heart is heavy with watching the old ways fade like snow in spring." He stirred the fire with a stick. "But he still teaches, as he always has, that a man's honor lives in how he keeps peace, not in how many enemies he kills." "Wise words," Bear agreed quietly. "Wish I'd remembered them better after." His voice trailed off, but Henry seemed to understand. "The fire that took your family?" Henry asked gently. "You never spoke of it before." Bear was silent for a long moment. Chloe held her breath, knowing how rarely he discussed that night. "Rage nearly destroyed me," Bear said finally. "Wanted blood for blood. Came close to becoming the killer they claimed I was." He touched the scars on his face. "These healed cleaner than the ones inside." Henry nodded. "The people have a saying, a wound in the spirit takes longer to heal than a wound in the flesh. But heal it can, if we let it." "That why you left the army?" Bear asked. "After the treaties were broken?" "Partly," Henry replied. "Grew tired of standing between two worlds, watching promises turn to dust. Decided I could better serve both sides by living truly in my own way." He glanced at Chloe. "Sometimes the hardest path is also the right one." Chloe found herself drawn into their conversation, sensing the deep respect between these two men from different worlds. Their shared history spoke of trust forged in danger, but their friendship went beyond that. They had both chosen to rise above the hatred and suspicion that poisoned so many relationships between settlers and tribes. As the night deepened, Henry spoke of his people's beliefs about the stars, how they guided both feet and spirits through dark times. Bear shared memories of learning to track from Ute hunters in his youth. Their stories wove together naturally, bridging cultures without diminishing either. "My father says all people are like streams," Henry remarked, adding more wood to the fire. "We flow from different mountains, but in the end, we all reach the same great water. The trouble comes when we forget this truth." Bear grunted agreement. "Your father's wisdom puts most preachers I've known to shame." "Truth is truth," Henry said simply. "It doesn't matter what tongue speaks it." He looked at Chloe. "You have been quiet, young one. What do you think of these matters?" Chloe considered carefully before answering. "In town, they told us the Ute were savages who couldn't be trusted, but they said the same about Bear. She met Henry's eyes. I'm learning that people aren't always what others say they are. Henry smiled. A wise observation for one so young. He glanced at Bear. She has good eyes, this one, sees past the surface to what lies beneath. The fire popped, sending sparks swirling up into the falling snow. Chloe wrapped her blanket tighter, watching the two men continue their quiet conversation. They spoke of changes in the territory, of justice and injustice, of the challenge of maintaining honor in a world that often seemed to reward its opposite. What struck her most was how naturally they addressed these difficult subjects. No anger or bitterness, just clear-eyed acceptance of hard truths and harder choices. Their words carried the weight of experience, but also hints of hope. The people say that eagles see furthest when they fly highest, Henry observed. Perhaps that is why the Creator put these mountains here, to help us lift our eyes above the small quarrels of men. Bear nodded thoughtfully. Reckon there's truth in that. Up here, town boundaries and territory lines don't mean much, just survival and what's right. And friendship, Henry added softly. That too remains when other things fade. The snow continued falling as they prepared for sleep, Henry taking first watch despite Bear's protest that they were safe in his territory. Chloe lay wrapped in her blankets, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind in the pines. She found herself reflecting on how this day had shifted her understanding of the frontier. The lines that seemed so clear and permanent in Twin Creek, between settlers and tribes, law and outlaw, friend and enemy, were more complex than she'd imagined. Here in this snowy hollow, she was learning that true bonds could cross all boundaries when built on respect and shared values. Henry's quiet presence completed something in their small group, adding wisdom and perspective to their flight. He represented hope that different worlds could meet without clash, that understanding could grow in the most unlikely places. As sleep finally came to claim her, Chloe's last thought was one of gratitude, for Bear's protection, for Henry's guidance, and for the chance to see beyond the narrow views she'd been raised with. The fire burned low, and snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and wrapping the camp in pristine silence. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they rested in the peace of newfound trust and the promise of safe passage through these ancient mountains. Henry led them along winding riverbeds where icy water masked their tracks. The terrain grew rougher, dotted with granite outcrops and thick stands of pine. After 2 days of careful travel, the valley opened before them like a gift, a hidden pocket of meadow nestled between towering cliffs. There, Henry pointed toward a weathered cabin tucked against the valley wall. Old surveyor's place. Been empty 3 seasons now. Bear studied the structure with his good eye. Roof needs work. But it's perfect, Chloe breathed, taking in the sheltered location. A creek tumbled past the cabin's door, and the surrounding peaks would guard against unwanted eyes. They approached cautiously. The cabin was sturdy despite its neglect, built from thick pine logs with a stone fireplace. Inside, dust lay thick on rough-hewn furniture, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame. Mouse droppings scattered the floor, but the walls were solid. Rains got in through that roof, Bear observed, looking up at gaps in the wooden shakes. Need to patch it for the spring storms. Henry nodded. I have canvas in my pack. Pine boughs will help too. They worked through the afternoon. Bear and Henry stretched canvas across the worst gaps, while Chloe gathered armfuls of pine branches. The fresh-cut boughs released their sharp scent as the men wove them into a tight thatch over the canvas. My grandmother taught that pine keeps evil spirits away, Henry remarked, securing another branch. Bear grunted. Reckon we need all the protection we can get. By evening, the roof was sealed. Chloe had swept the cabin clean and laid fresh pine needles on the floor. The fireplace drew well once Henry cleared the chimney, and soon warmth began to chase away years of emptiness. I'll hunt tomorrow, Bear announced as they ate their dried provisions. Saw elk sign in the meadow. I can help, Chloe offered quickly. Bear shook his head. Need you here. Learn from Henry about keeping the fire and cooking proper. Can't live on trail food forever. The next morning, Bear left before dawn with his rifle. Henry taught Chloe the art of maintaining a cooking fire, how to bank the coals, feed the flames gradually, and keep smoke to a minimum. Fire is like a living thing, he explained. It needs care and attention, not too much or too little. When Bear returned with an elk haunch over his shoulder, Henry showed Chloe how to butcher and prepare the meat. She learned to slice thin strips for drying, to render fat for cooking, to use every part with respect. The people say that waste dishonors both hunter and prey, Henry told her as they worked. Her hands grew confident with the knife, and soon strips of venison hung drying from poles near the fireplace. Days settled into rhythm. Bear hunted while Chloe tended the cabin and learned frontier skills from Henry. Her cooking improved steadily. Even Bear noticed, though his praise came in actions rather than words, cleaning his plate, accepting seconds, nodding approval over his cup. Evenings brought them together around the fire. Henry shared stories of his people, speaking of ancient wisdom and changing times. Bear listened more than he spoke, but his silences grew comfortable rather than stern. Sometimes he even smiled at Chloe's attempts to pronounce Ute words Henry taught her. One night, as flames danced on the hearth, Chloe surprised herself by addressing Bear differently. "Sir?" she asked, offering him more stew. "Would you like another helping?" Bear looked up sharply, but his expression softened at her nervous smile. After that, Sir became natural, then Mr. Jacobs as their trust deepened. He began answering her mealtime prayers with quiet amens, his deep voice joining hers in gratitude. The valley grew warmer as spring crept higher into the mountains. Wild onions sprouted in the meadow, and Chloe learned to gather them along with other early plants Henry identified. Laughter came easier, echoing off cabin walls that no longer felt strange. But danger lurked beyond their peaceful hollow. Henry made regular scouting trips, ranging far down the valleys to check for pursuit. One afternoon, he returned earlier than expected, his usual calm replaced by urgency. "Dane's men," he reported grimly. 2 days back, maybe 3, following an old trail but working this way. Bear's face hardened. "How many?" 6 riders. Good horses. Well armed." Henry drew a rough map in the dirt. "They split up here, searching parallel valleys. Soon they will find signs of our passage." Chloe's hands trembled as she set down her mending. The piece they'd found suddenly felt fragile, as spring ice. Bear was already checking his rifles, laying out ammunition. "We'll set traps along the likely approaches. Make them cautious, slow them down." He glanced at Chloe. "Show her the back trail tomorrow. If trouble comes, she needs to know the escape route." "I won't leave you," Chloe protested. "You'll do as you're told," Bear said firmly, but his eyes held concern rather than anger. "Your safety matters most." That evening, Bear and Henry worked late into the night, planning defenses. Chloe watched them bend over crude maps, speaking in low voices, marking positions where they would set traps and post lookouts. Through it all, she felt the weight of their care. These 2 men from different worlds, united in protecting her. Bear might growl, and Henry might speak softly, but both were ready to risk everything to keep her from harm. Later, unable to sleep, Chloe slipped outside. The night was clear, stars burning bright above the valley walls. She found Bear sitting on the cabin's rough bench, rifle across his knees. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "So should you, sir." She settled beside him, drawing her shawl tight. Silence stretched between them, comfortable despite their worry. An owl called from the forest edge. Finally, Bear spoke. "Been good weeks here?" he said quietly. "Almost forgot what it was like, having folk around, having purpose beyond just surviving." "It's felt like—" Chloe hesitated, then finished softly. "Like family." Bear's hand tightened on his rifle, but he nodded. "Reckon so," he agreed gruffly. "Makes the coming fight harder, and more worth fighting?" Chloe touched his arm gently. "We'll pray double hard tomorrow." A hint of smile touched Bear's scarred face. "Been doing that myself lately, more than I have in years." They sat together until the moon set, guardian and ward becoming father and daughter under the vast mountain sky. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had this moment of peace, a gift as precious as the valley that sheltered them. Inside the cabin, Henry added wood to the fire, its warm light spilling through the window like a blessing. The valley held its breath, waiting for whatever dawn would bring. The evening settled soft around the valley cabin. Spring winds whispered through new leaves, carrying the sweet scent of wild roses that had begun blooming along the creek. Inside, lamplight cast warm shadows as Bear and Chloe worked at their evening tasks. Bear sat in his rough-hewn chair, methodically cleaning his rifle. The familiar motions brought comfort, oiling the barrel, checking the action, ensuring every part moved smooth as silk. At the table, Chloe sorted through their gear, mending tears in clothing and packs with neat, careful stitches. Henry had left that morning to scout the back trails again. The cabin felt peaceful without being lonely, filled with the comfortable sounds of their work. The scratch of Bear's cleaning rod, the whisper of Chloe's thread through fabric. "Mr. Jacobs?" Chloe's voice was hesitant, breaking the quiet. Bear looked up from his rifle. "Hmm?" She set down her mending, fingers twisting in her lap. "There's something I need to tell you, about why I really left Twin Creek." Bear laid his cleaning supplies aside, giving her his full attention. The lamplight caught the scars on his face, but his expression was gentle. "My stepfather, Sheriff Dane," Chloe continued slowly. "He isn't actually my kin at all. My mother was married before, to another man. A good man named Jacob." Bear's hands went still on the rifle. Something flickered in his one good eye. "She never talked much about him," Chloe said. "But I found letters once, hidden in her Bible after she died. Love letters, signed with that name. Jacob." She swallowed hard. Dane married her later, after her first husband was gone. He made her burn the letters when he found them. The cabin grew very quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Your mother," Bear said, his voice rough. "What was her name?" "Sarah," Chloe whispered. "Sarah Matthews, before she married." The rifle slipped from Bear's fingers, clattering against the floor. He stood so suddenly his chair toppled backward. "Sarah," he breathed. His scarred face had gone pale as fresh snow. "My Sarah." Chloe stared at him, her heart beginning to pound. "What?" "Jacob." Bear's voice shook. "That was my name. Bear Jacob. Your mother, Sarah, she was my wife." The world seemed to tilt beneath Chloe's feet. She gripped the table edge to steady herself. "But that would mean, you're my stepdaughter." Bear's words came out barely above a whisper. "All this time." Chloe's legs gave way. She sank onto the bench, trembling. "Mother never said, she never told me what happened to you. Dane said you'd died. He told the town I set the fire. Bear's voice was raw with old pain. The fire that killed your mother and... He stopped, looking suddenly at the dusty cradle in the corner. And your baby brother. Asher, Chloe breathed, the name falling from her lips like a prayer. The cradle. You carved it for him. For my son. Bear's hands clenched into fists. For your brother. Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks. She stared at the man before her, this scarred, gentle giant who had taken her in, protected her, taught her to survive. The man her mother had loved. The father she should have known. I remember now, she said softly. Just bits and pieces. A tall man with kind eyes who used to carry me on his shoulders, who taught me my first prayers. Her voice broke. Before the fire, before everything changed, Bear made a sound like a wounded animal. 2 long strides brought him to her side. His big hands hovered uncertainly, as if afraid to touch her. You were so small, he said hoarsely. Not even 5 years old. I thought you'd died in the fire, too. Dane said the whole family. He shuddered. I couldn't bear to go back, to see the ruins. I just ran, like a coward. No. Chloe stood, reaching for his hands. You were hurt, betrayed. He took everything from you. Everything but you. Bear's voice cracked. Lord above, I've had my daughter with me all these weeks and never knew it. Something broke open in Chloe's heart. With a sob, she threw herself into Bear's arms. He caught her, holding her tight against his chest, as if he'd never let go again. My girl, he whispered into her hair. My precious girl. They sank to their knees together on the cabin floor, weeping. All the years of loss and loneliness poured out between them. Bear rocked her like she was still that small child, his tears falling silent and hot against her hair. I'm so sorry, he kept saying. So sorry I wasn't there, that I didn't know. You're here now, Chloe answered, clinging to him. We found each other. God brought us together again. They stayed that way for a long time, neither willing to let go. The lamp burned lower, shadows deepening around them, but they hardly noticed. Years of pain were washing away in that embrace, replaced by something new and precious and healing. Finally, Bear pulled back just enough to look at her face. His rough thumbs gently wiped away her tears. You have her eyes, he said softly. Sarah's eyes. How did I not see it before? Maybe you weren't ready to, Chloe answered. Maybe we both needed time to trust again first. Bear nodded slowly. His gaze drifted to the cradle in the corner. Would you like to hear about him? About Asher? Please. Chloe settled closer, leaning her head against his shoulder. Tell me about my brother. Bear's arm tightened around her. In a voice thick with emotion, he began to speak. He told her how tiny Asher had been, born early one spring morning. How he'd had Sarah's dark curls and Bear's strong grip. How he'd loved to be sung to sleep with old hymns. I carved that cradle while waiting for him to be born, Bear said. Put every hope and prayer into each cut of the wood. When he finally came, he fit it perfect, like it was made just for him. He paused, swallowing hard. Which it was, I reckon. It's beautiful work, Chloe said softly, looking at the cradle's graceful lines, the carefully carved leaves and vines that decorated its sides. Should have been yours too, Bear said. Should have made you one just as fine when you came to us. Should have been there to watch you grow up, teach you your letters, protect you from men like Dane. You're protecting me now, Chloe reminded him. And teaching me too, about survival, about courage, about forgiveness. Bear touched her cheek gently. You're the one teaching me about that last one, daughter. showing me there's still good in this world worth fighting for. The word daughter sent warmth flooding through Chloe's heart. She'd been alone so long, yearning for family, for belonging. Now here it was, in the most unexpected place. "I've been praying for a father," she admitted. "Someone to trust, to lean on. God answered by leading me straight to you." Through a snowstorm, no less. Bear's voice held a hint of his rare smile. "Reckon he has his own way of doing things." "Reckon he does." Chloe smiled through her tears. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the firelight dance across the cabin walls. The cradle's shadow stretched long behind them, no longer a symbol of loss, but a bridge between past and present, connecting the family they had been to the family they were becoming. Bear's deep voice broke the quiet. "I want you to know something, Chloe. Whatever happens with Dane and his men, whatever comes next, you're not alone anymore. You're my daughter in every way that matters, and I'll die before I let anyone hurt you again." "I know," she said simply, because she did. The truth of it ran bone deep, sure as sunrise. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering dusk. Inside the cabin, father and daughter held on to their newfound truth, their newfound hope. The evening settled around them like a blessing, wrapping them in peace that felt, for the first time in years, like coming home. Dawn crept over the valley with unusual stillness. No birds called. No wind stirred the pines. Even the stream seemed to run quieter beneath its skin of ice. The silence pressed against the cabin windows like a weight, heavy with unspoken things. Henry stood in the yard, his dark eyes scanning the pale horizon. He felt the change in the air. Not just weather, but spirit. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Bear emerged, his shoulders hunched against more than just the morning chill. Henry watched his old friend pause at the woodpile, staring at nothing. The revelation about Chloe had shaken loose something deep in Bear's soul. Henry could see it in the way the big man moved, as if carrying an invisible burden. "Brother," Henry said softly in greeting. The Ute word held layers of meaning, respect, concern, connection. Bear looked up, his scarred face drawn with inner turmoil. "Henry." His voice was rough as pine bark. "The spirits are restless today." Henry gestured to the ridge rising above them, where a finger of morning mist curled like smoke from a peace pipe. "Walk with me?" Bear hesitated, glancing back at the cabin, where Chloe still slept. Henry waited, patient as the mountains themselves. Finally, Bear nodded. They climbed in silence, their boots crunching through patches of crusty snow. The ridge wasn't high, but its bare spine offered clear views in all directions. Henry chose a sun-warmed boulder and sat, patting the space beside him. Bear lowered himself with a grunt. For a long while, neither spoke. They watched golden light spread across the valley below, turning frost to fire on every branch and stone. A lone hawk circled overhead, riding the warming air. "Your heart is troubled," Henry said at last. It wasn't a question. Bear's hands clenched on his knees. "All these years," he said hoarsely, "all these years I've carried hate for what Dane took from me. My wife, my son, my good name. Now I find out he took my daughter, too, raised her under his own roof, hurt her with his own hands." His voice shook. "How can a man forgive such things?" Henry nodded slowly. "I asked myself the same question once," he said, "when blue-coated soldiers burned our winter camp. My sister's family was there, her children." He trailed off, pain flickering across his weathered features. Bear turned to look at him. In all their years of friendship, Henry had never spoken of this. "What did you do?" Bear asked quietly. "I hunted them." Henry's voice was matter of fact. Tracked them for days through the deep snow. When I found their camp, I had my rifle ready. 10 men, all sleeping. It would have been easy. But you didn't. No. Henry picked up a small stone, turning it in his hands. I sat there all night, watching them breathe, thinking about my sister's children, about hate, about what lives inside a man's heart. He paused. When dawn came, I understood something. What? That vengeance is like a poison arrow. It wounds the one who carries it worse than the one it's aimed at. Henry set the stone down carefully. I could kill those men, but their deaths wouldn't bring back the ones I loved. They would only kill something inside me, the part that knows how to love, to hope, to pray. Bear's breath fogged in the cold air. So you just let it go? No. Henry's voice grew firm. Forgiveness isn't about letting go. It's about holding on to something stronger. My people believe that all life is connected, past, present, future. When we choose violence, we break those connections. When we choose mercy, we heal them. Mercy, Bear repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. After what Dane did? Look there. Henry pointed to where wildflowers pushed through a patch of melting snow, tiny purple blooms no bigger than a child's fingernail. Winter tried to kill them, but still they grow, still they reach for light. That is mercy, choosing life when death seems easier. Bear stared at the flowers for a long time. His scarred hands opened and closed, opened and closed. I'm afraid, he admitted finally, his voice barely audible. Afraid that if I let go of this hate, there'll be nothing left of me. Henry laid a hand on his friend's shoulder. There will be everything left of you, brother. Everything that matters. The sun climbed higher, warming their faces. Below in the valley, smoke rose straight and true from the cabin chimney. Chloe would be awake now, starting breakfast, saying her morning prayers. She needs a father, Bear said softly, not a man eaten up with revenge. Then be that father. Henry stood, brushing snow from his buckskins. The past is like that frozen stream down there. You can't change its course, but you can choose which way to flow from here. Bear nodded slowly. He rose, looking at the tiny wildflowers again. Then he knelt and carefully gathered a small bunch, handling them as gently as he once held his infant son. They descended the ridge together, the morning silence different now, lighter, clearer. At the cabin door, Bear paused. Thank you, brother, he said quietly. Henry smiled. The thanks belongs to the one who brings flowers from snow, he replied, and daughters back to fathers. Inside, they found Chloe tending the fire, her face brightening at their return. Bear crossed to the dusty cradle in the corner and laid the wildflowers inside. The simple gesture seemed to fill the small space with something new, something that felt like hope. The day passed in peaceful work. They repaired the cabin's root cellar, cleaned weapons, preserved the last of the venison. As evening approached, Henry brought out a wooden flute from his pack. Its surface was smooth with age and decorated with carved symbols. It was my father's, he explained, offering it to Chloe. He taught me that music speaks when words fail. Chloe handled the instrument reverently. It's beautiful, she said, but I don't know how to play. Here. Henry positioned her fingers on the holes. Like this. Now breathe from your heart, not your mouth. The first few notes wavered uncertainly, but then a melody emerged, halting at first, then stronger. Bear recognized the hymn, Amazing Grace. His mother had sung it at every Sunday service. The simple tune floated through the cabin and out into the gathering dusk. Bear closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Each note seemed to loosen something in his chest, unwinding years of tight-wound grief and anger. Henry hummed softly along, adding harmonies in his deep voice. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The sound of the flute carried across the snow-dusted valley like a prayer. Chloe played until the last light faded. When she lowered the flute, tears shone on her cheeks, but she was smiling. Bear realized he was smiling too. A real smile, one that reached all the way to his heart. They shared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, but it felt like a feast. The cabin, which had for so long been Bear's prison of memories, now felt like something else. A sanctuary, a place of healing. As Henry banked the fire for the night, he began singing a Ute prayer song, one of thanksgiving and renewal. The unfamiliar words filled the darkness with warmth and peace. Bear listened, holding his daughter's hand. The wildflowers in the cradle caught the firelight, their small petals glowing like stars. Looking at them, he understood what Henry had meant about choosing life. The hate that had sustained him for so long was melting away, like snow in spring sunlight. In its place, something new was growing, something as fragile and powerful as those tiny flowers pushing through frozen ground. It felt like forgiveness. It felt like grace, like the music, like the prayer song, like his daughter's hand in his. It felt like coming alive again. The late February sun cast long shadows across the valley as winter's grip began to loosen. Patches of bare ground emerged between shrinking snowdrifts, and the creek's ice thinned enough to hear water moving beneath. Bear stood at the cabin door, breathing deeply of the changing air. His keen hunter's senses detected subtle shifts, birds calling earlier, sap stirring in the pines, wind carrying hints of thaw. Chloe joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "The light feels different," she observed. "Like it's waking up." Bear nodded. Even after years in these mountains, spring's gradual return never failed to move him. Before he could respond, Henry appeared from around the cabin's corner, his expression urgent. "Tracks in the new snow," he said quietly. "Elk herd passed through the upper meadow before dawn, but something's wrong. The trail's scattered, confused." Bear reached for his rifle. "Wolves!" Henry shook his head. "No predator signs. Come see." They followed Henry's lead through patches of crusty snow, Chloe careful to step in their footprints. The morning air bit sharp and clean in their lungs. As they climbed, Henry pointed out subtle marks in the snow, places where the herd had milled in circles, tracks showing animals stumbling. "There," he said finally, indicating a deep drift beneath a rock outcropping. "Listen." A faint sound carried on the breeze, a weak, desperate bleating. Chloe gasped. "Something's alive in there!" Bear and Henry exchanged glances, then began carefully approaching the drift. As they drew closer, they could see where part of the snowbank had collapsed, creating a deep pocket. Inside, barely visible, was a young elk calf, its legs splayed awkwardly in the packed snow. "Must have gotten separated from the herd," Bear said grimly. "Fell in and couldn't climb out." The calf's dark eyes rolled with fear as they approached. Its breath came in ragged pants, creating small clouds in the cold air. Without the herd's warmth, it wouldn't survive another night. "We have to help it," Chloe said firmly. Bear assessed the situation. "Henry, get on that ledge above. Be ready with a rope if we need it. Chloe, stay back, but keep talking. Your voice might calm it." He began slowly circling the drift, testing its stability. The snow had developed a thick crust that barely supported his weight. One wrong step could collapse the whole bank, possibly suffocating the calf. Bear moved with deliberate care, spreading his weight like crossing thin ice. Easy now, he murmured as he drew closer to the trapped animal. Easy there, little one. The calf thrashed weakly, but exhaustion had clearly set in. Its fur was rimmed with frost, legs trembling from cold and effort. Bear could see its sides heaving with each labored breath. "Henry," he called softly, "need that rope now. And Chloe, keep talking." Chloe began humming the hymn she'd played on Henry's flute days before. The gentle melody seemed to float on the morning air, and the calf's struggles gradually stilled. With painstaking slowness, Bear worked his way closer. The snow creaked ominously beneath him. Henry lowered the rope, and Bear managed to create a loose loop. Getting it around the calf would be the real challenge. "Lord," he heard Chloe praying quietly, "guide his hands." Bear took a deep breath, then made his move. The calf startled but was too weak to fight as he slipped the rope behind its front legs. "Now, Henry, pull steady!" The rope drew taut. Bear pushed from below while Henry pulled from above, and slowly, terrifyingly slowly, the calf began to rise from its icy prison. Snow crumbled away as its hooves scraped for purchase. Just as the animal cleared the drift's edge, the bank collapsed beneath Bear's feet. He lunged forward, catching himself on solid ground as the snow thundered down behind him. The calf sprawled on safe ground, sides heaving. "Praise be," Chloe breathed, hurrying forward with her shawl already off. She draped it over the shivering animal while Henry tied off the rope. "We need to get it warm," Bear said, checking the calf for injuries. "It's young, probably born late last season. Won't survive out here alone." Together they half-carried, half-guided the wobbly creature back to the cabin. It was barely more than skin and bones beneath its winter coat, but it weighed enough to make the journey slow and awkward. Inside, they cleared a space near the hearth. Chloe immediately began heating water, while Henry gathered clean straw from the lean-to. Bear examined the calf more thoroughly in the better light. "No broken bones that I can feel," he reported. "Just half frozen and starved." They worked together through the morning, warming the calf gradually with heated blankets, encouraging it to drink warm water sweetened with the last of their molasses. Chloe never left its side, stroking its neck and speaking softly. By afternoon, the animal had stopped shivering and managed to stand on wobbling legs. It accepted small handfuls of hay, drawing surprised laughs from them all when it tried to follow Chloe around the cabin. "It thinks you're its mama now," Henry said, smiling. Chloe's answering laugh faded as she looked at Bear. They both knew what the warming weather meant. Soon, the passes would clear enough for travel, and decisions would have to be made. That evening, after the calf had bedded down in its nest of straw, they gathered around the fire to talk. The flames painted their faces in shifting light and shadow as Bear spoke first. "When the snow clears," he said slowly, "I mean to ride into Twin Creek and face the law proper." Chloe started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. What Dane did, to me, to your mother, to you, it needs to come to light. But it has to be done right, through the law, or nothing changes." Henry nodded gravely. "The truth has power, but only if spoken in the right way, at the right time." "Which is why," Bear continued, "we need to prepare careful like. Write down everything. Dates, names, details. Make copies. Send them to people who can help. The territorial governor, newspapers, circuit judge." "I found these in the surveyor's desk," Henry said, producing several sheets of clean paper and a pencil. "Been saving them for when they were needed." Chloe took them with trembling hands. "I'll write it all down. Everything I remember about what happened after Mama died. How Dane treated me. The threats he made." The scratch of pencil on paper filled the cabin as Chloe wrote, pausing occasionally to wipe away tears. Bear and Henry sat in respectful silence, keeping the fire fed, checking on the sleeping calf. Finally, she set the pencil down. "It's done." Her voice was hoarse but strong. Bear read through the pages slowly, his scarred face tightening at certain passages. When he finished, he carefully folded the papers and tucked them inside his shirt. "It won't be easy," Henry warned. "Dane has friends in high places. The town knows him as law, not outlaw, and—" He hesitated. They may not take kindly to testimony from a Ute scout or a man they called Killer. "Then we'll need to be smarter than them," Bear said. "More patient, more prepared." He looked at Chloe. "You understand what this means? You'll have to face him too. Tell your story to men who might not want to hear it." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm not afraid anymore." "Well, maybe a little," she amended with a small smile. "But I've learned something here, with you both. Truth is like that elk calf we saved. Sometimes it gets trapped and buried, almost frozen. But if enough people care enough to help, it can be brought back into the light." The calf snorted softly in its sleep, as if agreeing. They all smiled at the sound. "Spring's coming," Henry observed, glancing at the window where starlight glimmered on melting snow. "The earth is warming, ice is breaking. Good time for new beginnings." Bear reached out and took Chloe's hand. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together. As family." She squeezed his fingers. "As family," she echoed. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire, the peaceful breathing of the sleeping calf, the whisper of wind in the pines outside. Hope felt as fragile as the first spring flowers pushing through snow, but just as real, just as determined to grow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in this moment, they had warmth and truth and each other. For now, that was enough. The dawn brought a bitter chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Henry stood motionless by the stream, his practiced eyes studying the ground. Fresh boot prints marked the muddy bank, too many to count, all pointing toward their hidden valley. Bear crouched beside him, running weathered fingers over the deepest impression. "Dane," Bear growled, recognizing the distinctive star pattern on the heel of the sheriff's custom boots. "Must have picked up our trail when the snow melted." Henry nodded grimly. "They're close, half day behind, maybe less." He gestured to broken twigs and disturbed moss. 8 men, maybe 10. Well armed. Back at the cabin, Chloe was tending to the rescued elk calf, which had grown strong enough to wobble around the yard. The sight of her peaceful morning routine made Bear's heart ache. Their fragile peace was about to shatter. "Get her out of here," Bear said quietly. "You know these mountains better than anyone. Take her north, through the high passes. I'll lead them south, make them think we're heading for Mexico." Henry's dark eyes met his. "They'll kill you if they catch you alone. Better me than her." Bear straightened, wincing at the old pain in his burned side. "I've lived my share of years. She's got her whole life ahead." They trudged back to the cabin, where Chloe immediately sensed something was wrong. The calf nuzzled her hand as she stood, searching their faces. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked softly. Bear nodded. "Henry's going to take you." "No." The word rang with quiet steel. "I won't run anymore." "Chloe, listen. I'm done running." She squared her shoulders, looking so much like her mother that Bear's chest tightened. "Running is what gave Dane his power. He depends on people being too scared to stand against him. Well, I'm not scared anymore." "This ain't about being brave," Bear argued. "It's about staying alive." "It's about doing what's right," she countered. "We have proof now. My statement, your testimony. Henry's word about what really happened that night. If we run, Dane wins. Again. Henry had been silent, watching the exchange with ancient wisdom in his eyes. Now he spoke. "The girl speaks truth, my friend. Sometimes the path of peace requires standing one's ground." Bear wanted to roar in frustration. Didn't they understand? Dane wouldn't care about proof or justice. He'd shoot first, bury the evidence, and spin whatever tale suited him. But looking at Chloe's determined face, Bear knew arguing was useless. She'd grown too strong, too sure of herself. They spent the morning preparing. Henry helped Bear set trip lines in the underbrush, while Chloe loaded spare rifles and moved the calf to a sheltered hollow behind the cabin. They positioned extra ammunition at strategic points and filled water buckets in case they had to withstand a siege. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Birds fell silent in the surrounding pines. Even the stream seemed to quiet its bubbling song. They came at noon. The first warning was a snapping twig, too loud to be natural, too close to be accidental. Bear gestured Chloe behind the cabin's corner, while Henry melted into the shadows of the porch. Boots crunched on pine needles. "Come on out, killer," Dane's voice rang through the clearing. "We know you're in there." Bear stepped into view, rifle held carefully pointed down. "This is private property, Dane." The sheriff stood in a shaft of sunlight, flanked by 9 armed men. His badge gleamed like a snake's eye. "Harboring a fugitive is a hanging offense. So's horse theft." His cold gaze found Chloe where she'd emerged, despite Bear's signals to stay hidden. "There's the little thief now." "I stole nothing," Chloe declared. "That mare was payment for work I did, fair and square." "That's not how your pa tells it." "He's not my father." Her voice carried clearly. "My mother's first husband was Jacob Bear, the man you framed for murder after you killed her." Murmurs rippled through Dane's men. The sheriff's face darkened. "Shut your lying mouth, girl." "We have proof," Bear said. "Witnesses, documents. Your whole house of lies is about to fall, Dane." "Proof?" Dane laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Ain't nobody going to believe a killer, a half-breed, and a disobedient brat over the word of a sworn lawman." He raised his rifle. "Now step aside. The girl's coming with me to learn some proper respect." "She's not going anywhere with you." Bear's voice was desert dry. "Have it your way." Dane's finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Bear saw the shift in Dane's stance and knew what was coming. He launched himself sideways, shoving Chloe clear as the shot cracked across the clearing. Fire erupted in his shoulder, spinning him around. More shots split the air as Henry opened fire from the porch, forcing Dane's men to scatter for cover. Bear tried to regain his feet, but his arm wouldn't support him. Through blurring vision, he saw Chloe struggling as 2 of Dane's men grabbed her. Her scream of rage cut him deeper than the bullet. "I warned you," Dane said, standing over him. "Should have stayed in your cave, preacher." Bear tried to reach his fallen rifle, but a boot kicked it away. Dane leveled his gun for a killing shot, then jerked back as Henry's bullet kicked up splinters by his feet. "Next one won't miss," Henry called. "Let them go." Dane's laugh was ugly. "You're outnumbered, Indian, and I've got what I came for." He gestured to his men, who were dragging a fighting Chloe toward the horses. "Don't worry, girl. We'll break that wild spirit of yours soon enough." "Bear!" Chloe's cry tore at his heart. "Bear, get up!" But he couldn't. Darkness was creeping in around the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw was Dane forcing Chloe onto a horse, her tears catching the sunlight like diamonds as they rode away. Time became fluid after that. Bear floated in and out of consciousness, aware of Henry's strong arms carrying him, the sting of herbs being packed into his wound, prayers in 2 languages washing over him like warm rain. Night fell. The cabin's familiar smells surrounded him: wood smoke, pine sap, leather. Henry's voice rumbled nearby, switching between Ute and English as he prayed, "Great Spirit, guide his healing. Dear Lord, grant him strength. Let him walk in beauty again. Through Jesus' name, amen." Bear forced his eyes open. The cabin was dark, except for firelight. His shoulder blazed with pain, but his mind was clearing. "How long?" he croaked. "Hours," Henry replied, helping him drink from a tin cup. "The bullet went clean through. You're lucky." "Lucky?" Bear's laugh was bitter. "They took her, Henry. I was supposed to protect her, and I failed. Again." "You took a bullet for her," Henry corrected. "That's not failure. That's love." Love. The word echoed in Bear's chest like a church bell. Yes, he loved Chloe, not just as his stepdaughter, but as the child of his heart. The thought of her in Dane's custody made him try to sit up. Henry's firm hand held him down. "Not yet, my friend. The body must heal before the rescue can begin." "She needs us now," Bear protested weakly. "And we will come for her," Henry promised, "but not as wounded men stumbling in the dark. Rest, heal, pray. The path will become clear." Bear subsided, knowing his friend was right, but hating every second of delay. Outside, an owl called mournfully. The rescued calf lowed softly from its shelter, missing Chloe's evening visit. Henry began singing quietly in his native tongue, a healing song as old as the mountains themselves. Bear let the melody wash over him, carrying prayers of its own. "Hold on, Chloe. Be strong. We're coming." The night deepened around the cabin, full of shadows and promises yet to be kept. The fever took Bear as darkness fell. His wounded shoulder burned like fire beneath Henry's poultice of herbs and pine sap. Sweat soaked the rough blankets as he tossed, muttering broken phrases that spoke of deeper wounds than bullet holes. "Asher." The name escaped his cracked lips. "My boy, the cradle's ready." Henry pressed a cool cloth to Bear's forehead, speaking soft words in both English and Ute. The cabin's shadows danced on log walls as he stoked the fire higher, knowing the night ahead would be long. Outside, wind keened through pine boughs like a mother's grief. "Sarah." Bear's good hand clutched at empty air. "Get Asher. The flames." His voice cracked on a sob. "Peace, my brother," Henry murmured, settling on a stool beside the bunk. "The past cannot hurt you now." He began to hum an ancient healing song, letting the melody wrap around Bear's restless form like a blanket of peace. Miles away, Chloe swayed atop a nervous bay mare, her wrists bound to the saddle horn. Dane's men had been riding hard since sunset, pushing their mounts down treacherous mountain trails in the dark. Her shoulders ached from the awkward position, but she kept her spine straight, refusing to show weakness. "Mercy is strength," she whispered to herself, remembering Bear's quiet words from their days in the valley. The prayer became a rhythm matching the horse's hoofbeats. Mercy is strength. Mercy is strength. One of Dane's deputies yanked her reins, making the mare stumble. "Quiet back there." Chloe pressed her lips together but held her head high. Let them mistake her silence for submission. She had learned more than just prayers in her time with Bear. She had learned patience. Back in the cabin, midnight deepened into that hollow hour before dawn. Henry had dozed briefly, jerking awake at Bear's ragged cough. The wounded man's fever still raged, but his breathing had steadied. Henry pressed fingers against Bear's throat, counting the pulse beats and nodding slowly. "The Great Spirit holds you close tonight," he said softly, mixing fresh herbs for another poultice. "Your path is not finished." Bear's eyes fluttered open, glazed but focusing. "Henry?" His voice was a dry whisper. "Here, friend. Henry helped him sip water from a tin cup. The fever is breaking. Chloe. Bear tried to rise but fell back with a groan. How long? Hours only. Dawn comes soon. Henry's dark eyes held sympathy and steel. You must rest more before you can ride. Bear's scarred face tightened with frustration. She needs us now. And we will come, but not as broken men. Henry's voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom. Sleep. Let the medicine work. I will wake you when it's time. As Bear drifted into healing sleep, Henry gathered his weapons and supplies. The sky outside had begun to pale, stars fading one by one. He checked Bear's wound one final time, replaced the water bucket, and laid fresh firewood within easy reach. I go to warn the preacher, he said quietly, though Bear couldn't hear. The town must know what comes. He touched his friend's forehead in blessing, then slipped out into the pre-dawn chill. The sun had just cleared the eastern peaks when Bear woke again. His shoulder throbbed, but the fever haze had lifted. He found a note scratched in charcoal on a piece of bark. Medicine in blue tin. Drink water. Wait for strength before following. H. Bear managed to sit up, gritting his teeth against the pain. His rifle leaned within reach, cleaned and loaded. Henry had thought of everything. Slowly, carefully, he swung his legs over the bunk's edge. The cabin tilted alarmingly, but he held still until the dizziness passed. Lord, he prayed hoarsely, give me strength to stand, to ride, to make this right. He touched his wounded shoulder, feeling the neat bandaging. Henry had left. Not for vengeance, for justice, for mercy. The morning light streamed through cabin windows, touching the dust-covered cradle in the corner. Bear's throat tightened at the sight. He had failed to protect his son, his wife, his home. But he would not fail Chloe. Not again. Using the wall for support, Bear pushed himself upright. His legs shook but held. One step, another. By the time he reached the cabin door, sweat darkened his shirt, but determination burned stronger than pain. Outside, his horse nickered a greeting from the lean-to where Henry had left her, saddled and ready. Bear leaned against the doorframe, gathering strength for what lay ahead. The mountain air tasted of pine and possibility. Somewhere to the east, hoofbeats carried his daughter further away with every passing moment. But Henry rode ahead to raise the alarm, and Bear would follow as soon as his body allowed. This time, truth would have its day. He looked to the brightening sky, remembering Chloe's quiet prayers by the firelight. Hold fast, he whispered. We're coming. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Twin Creek's whitewashed church, casting colored shadows across the worried faces of townsfolk packed into rough-hewn pews. Sheriff Dane stood before the altar, his badge gleaming as he gestured dramatically. Good people, he announced, voice dripping with false concern. I've saved this poor child from the clutches of that mountain devil Bear Jacobs. He placed a hand over his heart. She'll be properly looked after now. Mark my words. Murmurs of approval rippled through the congregation. Several women nodded, clutching their prayer books closer. But their sympathetic glances turned to gasps when Chloe rose slowly from her seat, her face bearing fresh bruises but her eyes bright with purpose. No, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. You'll hear the truth today, before God and everyone. She stepped into the aisle, shoulders straight despite her torn dress. Bear Jacobs is an innocent man. Sheriff Dane framed him for the fire that killed his family. He stole treaty lands from the Ute people, and he's stolen years of peace from this town with his lies. Some listeners leaned forward, doubt crossing their features. Others scoffed and shook their heads. The preacher raised both hands, commanding silence with his presence. "Let truth stand before God," he declared firmly, fixing Dane with a steady gaze. "In his house, all voices deserve hearing." Dane's face darkened. His hand moved toward his gun belt, making several people gasp. But before he could draw, the church doors crashed open with a bang that echoed off the rafters. Bear Jacobs stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the morning light. Though his face was pale from his wound, his good eye blazed with quiet strength as he stepped into the sanctuary. Bear stood steady despite his weakness, reaching into his worn leather vest. The morning light caught his scarred features as he pulled out a charred piece of paper, its edges crumbling. "This here's the original deed," Bear said, his deep voice carrying through the hushed church. "Found it in the ashes after the fire. Shows how Dane changed the records, stealing both my land and the Ute territory beyond." He held the document up, letting everyone see the altered signatures and dates. "This ground's not mine to own," Bear declared, meeting Dane's wide-eyed stare. "But mercy is." The sheriff's hands began to shake, his confident facade cracking. Several townsmen moved deliberately between Dane and his gun belt, their faces hard with newfound resolve. Others crowded closer, examining the burned deed with dawning understanding. The preacher stepped forward, his Bible clutched tight. "Let it be recorded that Sheriff Dane's crimes stand revealed before God and man." His voice rang with authority. "By the power vested in me by this territory, I declare him stripped of all authority in Twin Creek." Dane's face twisted with rage. "You can't," he sputtered, backing towards the door. Finding himself surrounded by stern faces and crossed arms, he spun around and fled, boots pounding down the church steps and away into the wilderness. A heavy silence fell over the congregation. One by one, heads bowed in prayer or shame. Bear's strength finally gave out, and he sank to one knee on the wooden floorboards. Chloe was instantly beside him, supporting his broad shoulders. "You did it, Pa," she whispered, tears gleaming in her eyes. "You chose mercy over vengeance." The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing father and daughter in its warm glow as the congregation prayed around them. Spring's warmth crept into the mountains like a gentle awakening. Streams swollen with snowmelt rushed past the cabin, where Bear Jacobs, Chloe, and Henry worked from sunup to sundown, rebuilding their home. The sharp ring of Henry's axe echoed through the valley as he and Bear squared fresh pine logs. Sawdust filled the air with its sweet scent, mixing with the earthy smell of thawing ground. Their steady rhythm spoke of friendship deeper than words, each man anticipating the other's movements as they milled new support beams for the cabin's damaged sections. Near the doorway, Chloe knelt in the fresh-turned earth, carefully setting out the seedlings she'd started weeks ago in clay pots. Her fingers worked the soil with gentle purpose, tucking each tiny plant into its new home. The garden would feed them through summer and fall, she knew, but it meant more than just sustenance. These growing things marked their permanent claim to this place. "The preacher's letter came with the supply wagon," she called out, wiping dirt from her hands onto her apron. "Says there's still no sign of Dane. Folks reckon he crossed into Utah territory." Bear paused in his work, running a weathered hand across his brow. "Good riddance," he said, simply, but his shoulders relaxed slightly at the news. Henry nodded sagely. "Some men choose to run from truth rather than face it. The land will judge him now." As afternoon light slanted golden through the pines, they gathered to raise the hand-carved cross Bear had worked on through the evenings. Its rough surface bore careful designs, leaves and vines that spoke of new life. They planted it deep beside the cabin door, a symbol of both memorial and hope. Chloe stood back, taking in their work, The solid walls, the fresh-swept porch, the tender green shoots pushing up through dark soil. "We should call this place Asher's Valley," she said softly, "to honor what was lost and what's been found." Bear's breath caught at the name of his lost son. But when he turned to Chloe, tears shone in his good eye, and a smile, rare and precious, curved beneath his graying beard. He wrapped one arm around his stepdaughter's shoulders, the other reaching out to clasp Henry's weathered hand. The valley rang with birdsong, nature's own hymn of praise. Winter's grief had melted away like the last patches of snow, leaving behind the promise of healing. Here in this high mountain sanctuary, 3 souls from different worlds had found something precious, a family forged by choice rather than blood, and a home built on foundations of mercy. Evening settled over Asher's Valley like a gentle blanket. Through the cabin's freshly cleaned windows, lamplight spilled warm and golden across polished pine floors. The boards gleamed with loving care, each knot and grain telling its own story of renewal. Chloe moved quietly through the main room, gathering spring wildflowers she'd picked that afternoon: purple lupine, white mountain daisies, and delicate columbine. Her fingers arranged them with careful precision in the carved wooden cradle that now sat in a place of honor near the hearth. No dust gathered on its smooth surface anymore. Instead, fresh flowers marked each passing week, a tribute to both memory and hope. The door creaked open, bringing with it the sweet mountain air and Henry's tall figure. His arms cradled bundles of dried herbs wrapped in cloth, medicines and seasonings from his people's wisdom. But it was his broad smile that brought the greatest gift. "Good news travels with me tonight," he announced, hanging his worn leather bag on its peg. "The council fire brought peace between settlers and our people near Thunder Basin. Grazing rights are settled fair, with water enough for all." Bear looked up from where he sat mending a bridle, his scarred face softening. "About time sense won out over pride." "The old ways still teach us," Henry agreed, settling onto a chair Chloe offered. "When hearts listen, the land provides for everyone." Chloe stirred the pot of rabbit stew hanging over the fire, adding pinches of Henry's dried herbs. The familiar scent of sage and wild onion filled the cabin. She cut thick slices of fresh bread, still warm from baking. Their evening meal was simple but deeply satisfying, food shared between family chosen by love rather than blood. They ate without hurry, savoring both the meal and the comfortable silence between them. Through the window, they could see the last rays of sun painting the mountain peaks rose gold. A cool breeze rustled aspen leaves, carrying the distant song of a whippoorwill. When the bowls were empty and night pressed against the windows, Bear rose to secure the cabin for sleep. His movements were sure and steady now, no longer haunted by old ghosts. At the door, he paused, testing the latch one final time against the evening chill. Chloe watched him from beside the cradle, her heart full of gratitude for all that had changed since that desperate winter night when she'd first stumbled through that same door. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life that day." Bear turned, his good eye reflecting the lamplight. For a long moment he studied the scene before him. The young woman who'd become his daughter, the friend who'd helped heal his soul, the home rebuilt from ashes of loss. When he spoke, his voice carried the gentle wisdom of hard-won peace. "You came here by mistake, girl, but maybe grace ain't ever a mistake at all." Henry hummed agreement, a traditional melody of his people weaving through the quiet room. Chloe's laugh bubbled up, bright and clear as mountain spring water. Bear's deeper chuckle joined in, and soon all three voices merged in shared joy. The sound drifted out through the cabin's walls, carried by the evening wind up into the star-filled sky. It echoed across Asher's Valley, named for a lost child, but now cradling new life, new hope, new family. Here in this high place, mercy had done its perfect work, turning strangers into kin and sorrow into dancing. Faith, forgiveness, and love had built something stronger than blood or bitter memory. As night deepened over the valley, their laughter rang true and sweet, a testament to grace found in life's hardest trails and the healing that comes when hearts open wide enough to let it in. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.